Hello, everyone. We're back again, aren't we? Hi, Steve.
Hello.
And we're here to talk about some role-playing game related things, as always. But first, we have some business to attend to because something needs updating. And the thing that needs updating is obviously Matt and Steve's TTRPG accountabilityometer, which is still waiting for a snappier title. But here it is in all its glory. Last time you were with us, it was 4 games out of 10 down. And now, guess what? We are at the halfway stage because I've played Trophy Dark. So that puts us at 5 out of 10, Steve. Did you think we'd get there so quickly?
I didn't really think we'd get there so quickly. I will admit to feeling a little bit like I'm falling behind on this endeavor, but
Well, it's just 3-2. It's not. It's not that. It's not like you're lagging too far behind.
I suppose that's fair.
And we did just chalk Dead Belt off by playing it for fun between us. So I'm sure that we can probably play one of these games together at some point in the future and get a 2-for-1. But yeah, I played Trophy Dark. It's up on my channel now. By the time this goes out, it'll be up and people will have enjoyed it. That's a fucking great game, Steve. It's so good. For anyone who doesn't know, Trophy Dark is a kind of like a one-shot based game that is all about playing to fail. It's about doomed treasure hunters in a forest that doesn't want them there, and the players are encouraged to slowly lean into the sense that they are losing their minds and bodies to eldritch forces. And well, I played with 3 people I'd never played games with before, who all applied to be on the show, and they absolutely brought their A games. They came up with some of the most disgusting, darkest stuff. There was at one point where someone came up with something, and I was like, "Oh my god, that's amazing!" But also, are you okay in real life? Because that was dark, man. That was so dark. But yeah, I would heartily recommend Trophy Dark to anyone. Please check out my videos if you haven't seen them. And I also made a how to play video because by the time I got to the end of the editing the actual play, I realised I got the rules wrong. Who would have thought that someone like me with such a keen eye for detail would do such a thing? But also it's weird because, like I say, you play to fail in Trophy Dark, right?
Yeah.
And you're not expected to live. The players aren't expected to live, and that was the case in our game. And so the person that perished first, I realised when I watched it back, editing it, they did so because I got a rule wrong that they probably shouldn't have died at that point where they did. And looking back at it and then realising some of the other bits that I got slightly wrong, if I'd have been playing it right, all these guys would have been dead within 45 minutes because their dice rolls were so bad. And
Oh,
if we'd have played it rules exactly as written, I would have been punishing them way harder, and they would have all died much sooner, and we wouldn't have got 4 hours of content out of it. It would have been more like 45 minutes.
so are you saying, Matt, that by having a loose attention to the rules, you actually told a better story?
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing is that's it. The story was great, and everyone had an amazingly fun time. But yeah, the rule. At least I tell you what. At least I got the rule wrong consistently. So I got the rule wrong every time.
Hey, that's good.
So yeah, at least I could be consistent with that. I just want to say we were playing it on hard mode, a hard game anyway, on hard mode. Are you curious about Trophy, Steve? I know that you said you were when we talked about it originally, but is the idea of a one shot of a doomed treasure hunter appealing to you?
It is. Yeah, I actually went and picked it up on your recommendation when the bundle was on sale. And I haven't played it yet, but read through it and having, watched your experience of it, it definitely has piqued my interest. And I feel like one of the things that I struggle with sometimes
Hmm.
with TTRPGs is that feeling that the players and their characters should always kind of win, and that, like, as a game master but also as a player, I
Mm.
know how failure averse players can be, And so having a game where you sit down at the table and the expectation is, hey, none of us make it out alive, so let's just play it to the hilts and really, go for it, is really appealing to me. So I'm hoping to at some point put together a one shot for my group and see what terrible things they can endure before they ultimately perish in
Yeah.
the deep dark of the woods.
Yeah, I think your group would really love it as well. It's a real like you give people the creative freedom to come up with things within like a framework, and the system really sings, especially the system of devil's bargains, which is something that is kind of in Blades in the Dark, but this is slightly different in Trophy Dark, where it's a kind of an ongoing discussion when you ever have to roll dice. Everyone is involved in what the stakes are, and when you go around the table and offer these devil's bargains, and to start with, everyone's a little unsure of what they are, and they're quite pedestrian, the ones that come out, and by the end, it's like, I'll offer you the devil's bargain that no matter what happens, your god will damn you to eternity. It's just like, wow, that's a bit better. That's a bit better than, oh, they lost their map. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, some of the stuff that people come up with once they kind of click into it is amazing, because once you start to get your head round the idea of devil's bargains and stake setting for other players, you're always looking for opportunities to do it, and you're always looking for creative ways to make the story more interesting, which is grand, and I would heartily recommend anyone do that. Now, this month, because it's May, Jesus, where's this year going, Steve?
I don't know.
But we are 5 games down and 5 months of the year in, so like we are actually doing pretty well.
We're ahead of the curve.
We're ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
One shots are appealing because they are one and done, and you can kind of get in and get out, right? You can get a group together. It doesn't take up too much time. Everyone has a fun time. And I like the idea that in Trophy Dark and other games of that ilk, like 10 Candles, for example, like no one will become attached to their characters because they won't live. So you won't have people nagging you saying, oh man, can we just turn this into a campaign? And that's it, because it's just done, right? But that's not to say that long-running campaigns aren't a lot of fun. And I recently came to the... Some people might know who watch this channel. Recently came to the end of my 3-year Starforged campaign. Thank you, Steve. You're right to clap. And we've had this conversation kind of like privately in our kind of WhatsApp or whatever. But I've been so busy that I haven't really had much time to process it. And it got us thinking when we were talking about this that ending campaigns is kind of rare, isn't it, in role-playing games? What's your conversion rate, do you think, of ending campaigns to starting campaigns?
Not good. Not good at all. I'm trying to think if I have ever personally finished a campaign, like running a campaign that I've started. I've played in a couple. There were a couple of campaigns when I was in college that we played from like start to finish, but also we basically played those throughout the semester. And so we kind of had a defined time frame within which to fit this campaign. And so it wasn't just a like, all right, we're going to start this campaign and we'll see how far it goes. It was all right, well, it's the start of a new semester, so time to start a new campaign. And we know when the semester ends, so that's when the campaign wraps up, because we don't know if we're coming back the next semester or if we're gonna be too busy with classes or whatever. So I played in a couple of campaigns that went from beginning to end during that time in my life, but I think since then every other campaign that I've been part of has fizzled out at some point or another before the actual conclusion of the campaign, with the exception, of course, of my own solo campaigns that I've done. But again, I had a like season idea of like, okay, I'm going to run this campaign for however many episodes it takes to conclude this particular story that I've started.
Hmm.
And it was just me playing those games, and so I didn't have to contend with other people like having life changes where because that's mostly where the campaigns that have fizzled out have been, because people's lives have changed, and like, oh, we can't get together on the night of the week that we usually get together. Then we go 6 weeks without playing, and then all of a sudden somebody gets a new idea for a campaign, and it's like, oh, well, let's get this combination of people together because we all still generally have the same schedule and we can make it work.
Mm.
Whereas playing solo, like you only have yourself. Now, that's not to say that you can't start a solo campaign and have it fizzle out, but I think that's something that probably is much more common for people who are just playing solo to play and to do it for themselves and to have fun,
Hmm.
as opposed to like us, where we're creating a show. And I don't know about you, but I feel this intense responsibility to conclude a campaign and to not just cut it off, uh, which sometimes can be good or bad depending on how much you're enjoying it. But I think both of us have had experiences where we thought our campaign was going to go for a certain length,
Mm.
and through a variety of circumstances, we had to shorten it.
Mm.
So I think that's an interesting thing as well to talk about, taking a campaign to its natural conclusion, but also sometimes you have to find the conclusion to wrap things up more quickly. What do you think
Yeah.
about that?
No, I think you're dead right, and I think that it's interesting that you said about kind of wrapping up the show a little earlier, because my first two seasons are 24 episodes long, arbitrarily, because TV shows are 24 episodes long, or they certainly used to be, and for some reason I got it in my head that that would be a good idea, and I'm never doing that again because that's too many episodes. And it was really when, like I said, I haven't really had much time to process my Starforged campaign being over, but I did spend a bit of time kind of looking at how long I had made content for, and 3 years and 50 plus hours. Just like 50 hours is, that's a lot of me talking to myself. And I think that, this
That's
last,
nothing, bud.
yeah, this last season I shortened to 12 because I probably could have done 24, but I know that there would have been some wheel spinning in there. And spoilers for anyone who's not heard, not too bad spoilers, but I find myself in the last session of my Starforged campaign rolling to fulfill my background vow against 4 progress, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
And but that's pacing games are hard. And if I think about, if I would have tried to get up to 10 progress on that background vow, I'd be playing for 6 years, which is not what anyone wants. I think from the very start, I'm not sure how you feel about this when you start a solo campaign, but I kind of had a vague idea of what I wanted the story to be, and that vague ending of what I wanted, things got very much off the rails in between the start and the end of this. But I had a vague concept of where Archer's story was going. Did not expect him to pick up so many waifs and strays along the way. But there we go. And I think that I got to the point where I was like, well, actually, I can get there in 12 episodes rather than 24 episodes. And I think that, if I was streaming this game, playing it live, it would be much harder to pace that out. But when you're taking your time and you're playing the game slowly and you're kind of structuring it a little more like a story, it's a little easier to kind of get to where you need to go. But it's interesting about what you say about solo campaigns being easier to finish because you don't have to rely on anyone. Like there's so many times that I'm in WhatsApp groups with people I play role playing games with or any games with, and we're like, can we all just quit our jobs and like live on a commune somewhere and just play games the whole time because there's just too many games and not enough time.
Yeah.
And me looking at we obviously started out with our list of games we wanted to play at the start of this year, and that was kind of a bit of fun. But now it's become a point of order that we must get through these 10 games. But then looking at it like, and realistically how hard it is to get people together for games, like if I want to play all of those in addition to games I'm already playing that don't count towards that, that's my year done. And it's really difficult unless it's your full-time job to get games in and find time to kind of hang out with your friends and pretend to be goblins or whatever. It's difficult. But then solo is always easier to find the time, and I think that's why I was so excited about starting a solo channel, because I was like, oh, all of the bad stuff about RPGs, not being able to get people to commit to dates and all that kind of stuff, is out the window. I just have to motivate myself to keep going. And I think it was the moment for me is when people actually started to interact with me and like leave comments and stuff and get in touch to say they were enjoying the story. I kind of know you feel the same way about this. You felt a bit of responsibility to finish, because there's nothing worse than finding a good show on Netflix and then you get a few episodes in, you're like, oh, this is cancelled at the end of the second season. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, like actually getting to the end is nice. And also, like, one thing I really like is obviously my show's been going 3 years now, and still probably once or twice a month I'll get someone who will leave a comment on the first episode, and they'll be like, I've just found this and you've got loads, I can't wait to explore more. And I'm like, oh buddy, you've got so much to work through. But also, like, that's there forever now. Like, someone will accidentally stumble across that in 5-10 years time, and they will be able to listen to it to the end, which is a pleasing thing. But I find ending things, like most people, I think, way harder than beginning things, right? Which is odd, because a lot of people struggle to take that first step. They look at a blank page and they can't do it. I'm more than happy to just step off the cliff and see what happens. But invariably, a lot of things don't get finished. In terms of my campaigns that have finished, like, I think my Star Wars campaign, the first one I ever ran, just kind of, it got to the end of the adventure that we had, and then we never picked it up again. We tried a one-shot over lockdown, but it was kind of fine to leave it where it was, because it just felt like the end of an episode. I don't think anyone was hankering for any more of it. The Dungeon World campaign I ran, it was about a 2-year one, that did end, and that actually had an end that I think we'd been playing a while, and there wasn't like lots of different things. It was one story with one big bad. And it got to the point where I was like, oh man, if we just do 6 more episodes or 6 more sessions, I think we can get to the big bad and the confrontation. And literally the day before we had the last session, I came up with an idea for the ending, and then we had that, and then everyone was like, hey, that was great. And it ended. I think that's the only campaign I've ever run that's actually ended for people. Everything else has just been one shots or things that have just been like, oh, okay, this is fine now to leave it here. And that is generally all right. That's kind of how a lot of campaigns work. My Star Trek Adventures one is like episodic, like it's episodes of a Star Trek show. And when we get to the end of the episode, it's fine. We could all stop for a bit and then we can come back to it. It's not like it's a cliffhanger in between. But yeah, do you think people find it hard to end campaigns because they don't want to let go?
I think that's part of it. I think part of it is not wanting to let go. I think part of it too is endings are, in many ways, incredibly challenging to reach a satisfying conclusion to a narrative, and to give a group of characters a send-off that feels both final but also like satisfying and hopeful that there's more on the horizon for those characters, even if you're not going to sit down and play as those characters again. And I mean, I think this is why, like, how many TV shows have a finale episode that you're just like, man, I wish this show ended like 2 episodes earlier
Yeah.
because it just didn't stick the landing. And I feel like that's really hard with campaigns as well, because you're creating something together as a group. And so it's an interesting challenge to try and create a satisfying ending for a small group of people who are both the authors of this story and also the audience of
Mm,
this story. And when you're, as a game master, like, you're not necessarily the only one who has a say in where things conclude. Obviously, with our like solo games, we rely on the dice and the oracles a lot to guide our path through a story. But I don't know about you, I feel like I have a pretty firm hand on the tiller of where my solo story is going, because I'm approaching it as a writer, as a person who is viewing what I'm doing in my show as essentially creating an audio book that has game mechanics for resolving the conflict points in
mm,
the story. And so I have a more driven focus on, okay, I'm trying to bring these pieces together and tie up these loose ends, but I'm the only one that really has any narrative say, because I'm also the one who's telling myself to pick up the dice and roll. And there
mm,
are times where it's like, you know what? I'm not going to roll any dice because this thing needs to happen in order for this story to reach a satisfying conclusion. And I've done, instead of doing one long campaign like you've done, I've done now three kind of, I'll call them short seasons, even though my first season was 34 episodes, my second season was 55 episodes. Good lord, I don't know who let me talk for that long on one
they
story.
can't. They can't stop us. They just can't
They
stop
can't
us. They
stop
try
us.
to,
They can't
but they
stop us.
can't.
Yeah. And then my third season was, I actually stole your idea for doing the 24 episodes, and unfortunately only made it to 20 for a variety of life reasons, and also because I felt when I got to that 20th episode, I was like, I could extend this for another 4 episodes, but like this is a natural conclusion to that story.
Mm,
But I wonder if I was playing that campaign in a group setting and I was like, all right, guys, I think we've got 4 more sessions in us here. And then a bunch of stuff happens in, that first of those 4 sessions. And we're like, I think this is the end. Like, would that be satisfying for the other players at the table? Or would they be like, no, we've got more stuff we want to do? Because there's always, maybe not always, but almost always more things that your characters want to accomplish, or there's more answers they want to find for some mystery, and like hopefully you can wrap up all that stuff. But the truth is, with campaigns, it's hard to wrap up all those things. That being said,
mhm.
and this is kind of a moment where I'm going to reference a different creator in a different video, but have you seen the Matt Colville video about his most recent one about adventure length?
No, I've not seen that. No.
um okay, so his basic premise in that is that these speaking for the like D&D adventures and stuff like that, the big hardcover books are too big because they need like 2 to 3 years to run. And what we should really be focusing on are these shorter, 34 to 60 page adventures that can be finished in a couple of weeks to a month or two. And this is something that I've been thinking a lot about with my group, because we have a long running campaign that's going, but I'm thinking of it from the standpoint of like, okay, when we reach an act break for that long running campaign, which a friend of mine is running, like I want to run a campaign, but I don't want to run the next really long campaign. I want to run like 6 weeks or, 8 weeks and be like, all right, we're going to play this game for this short period of time. And we're basically going to do a mini series where we get in, we create some characters, we have some time to really kind of dig into those characters, but we're not going overboard with it. And there is a definitive end in sight where we know that we have to fit all this stuff in, because I want that little bit of a high from like being like, cool, bing, bang, boom. We finish that. We can come back to those characters with another short adventure in the future, but we can also walk away from those characters feeling like we have resolved a story, and that is that was a worthwhile endeavor on our parts. So what do you think about that? We're running shorter adventures as opposed to these like grand arching
Well,
campaigns.
I think I'm more interested in that because you get a kind of tighter story, I guess. I don't have any experience really of turning up to campaigns and just keep going and going and going, with the exception of the Star Trek Adventures campaign I'm in, but it feels like broken up and episodic. Well, I think the one we're doing next week or week after next, I think that's the conclusion of the current episode we're on, and then we can walk away for a bit and come back whenever. I think I would always like to keep things more contained, tighter, more focused. And I really like it when there's mechanical assistance from the game that you're playing. And to harp on about a game I've been talking about all year, my campaign of the Between has inbuilt mechanisms to count down the timer to the end of the campaign. Like it is built to be 12 to 14 sessions. And you have a ticking clock, which is the mastermind, who is the Moriarty-style villain in the background of all of your adventures, who just keeps dropping in and out of the story, has triggers, and once they are fully triggered and the mastermind conspiracy is revealed, you're in the end game. You have to stop doing all of the things you're doing and move on to the mastermind. And all of the characters have... There's no hit points or things in the Between, but they have kind of 10 or 12 things that they tick off on their character sheet. And when all of those things are ticked off, they're either dead or, they're at this big moment where, the werewolf is going to have to become the werewolf, or, the Dr. Frankenstein type character is going to have to try and bring the reanimated corpse alive. And, there is mechanical structures in place to mean that you can time conclusions a little easier in that game. I thought it's interesting about when you were talking about solo stuff, like one of the biggest turnoffs to people in role-playing games, especially people who've got a little bit more experience of playing them, is, being railroaded, right? And when you play solo, you could railroad yourself. It's fine. It's so good. Yeah. And and that's all you're doing. And you're only pleasing one person to get you to the conclusion. But if you think about, okay, well, let's say this exact same setup, the scenario that I've painted in my solo game was for a group, and I know that they're going to end up at this point, and I'm just going to make sure they get there with, they can diverge off the straight line between points A and B if they want to, but we're going to get to point B from point A. You feel guilty because you've railroaded them and you've not really given them any agency, whereas you're playing for yourself. I think that's kind of what we're talking about. We had a point A and a point B in mind. How we got there was fine, and it didn't feel bad to move there because it's our story. Whereas you're playing in a game with a group. You don't want to say, well, it's my story and you guys are going to follow it to get to where we're going. Which is why I think a lot of the time I struggle with pre-written adventures or modules that kind of exist, but also the opposite I find quite off-putting. I find the freewheeling, let's play this for 10 years and never move on to anything. I want my characters that I'm playing with or I'm playing as to have these big moments, these big climactic moments. I want them to build towards something, and I feel like a long running campaign that goes on forever. Like, you hear some people have been playing in their like D&D third edition campaign or whatever, and they're still going like 20 years later or whatever, and that's great because you love hanging out with your friends or whatnot. But in terms of story, like no good story that's ever been told in the world of pop culture lasts that long. Like The Simpsons has been on TV for more than 20 years, but you all seen what's happened to The Simpsons in the last like 10 or 12 years. Like you will exhaust your supplies of good story, and I think it's best to get out when you're, leave them wanting more, as it were.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of I actually said that the Star Wars campaign that I ran kind of fizzled out. It actually didn't. One of the other players took over as GM and I joined as player, the same group. And that was really cool because we'd built to this big moment where this big bad was going to come out, and it was like a basically Darth Maul with the serial number filed off. It was just like a kind of a not Darth Maul. Had this huge bit, GM put on Duel of the Fates, and we had this big scene where he came down this ramp, and then we just killed him in one round of combat. And we were just like, oh, okay. That guy, oh, I think he's dead. And it's like the GM rolled terribly. None of the special abilities went off. We all just rolled crits, like ridiculous crits, and we just we just pitch cleared him in like one round, and it was like, oh, I guess that's over then, I suppose. Which is a peril of building towards something and it not sticking that landing. But yeah, it's hard, isn't it, to know what's a satisfying ending. And I think when you're playing just for yourself, I found it much easier to think about what's a good end for my characters. Whereas if you are running for a table of 5 people, you want to think, well, hang on, I've got to satisfy each of these 5 players and what they think their character is after and what they want, and have that be a satisfactory conclusion for everyone. And that's just a very difficult balancing act.
It is. It really is. And I think that it's almost one of those things that I think would be interesting to put into like a session 0 of like, where do you want your character to go, and what would you consider to be a satisfying conclusion for your character? Because oftentimes as a game master, like I can observe what my players are doing and what their characters are interested in, but I don't always know the thing that would be satisfying to them, because I don't always know if they are pursuing something because they feel like, oh, well, Steve has given us clues to this thing, so obviously this is the thing that we need to go after, versus them being like, this is what my character is interested in, and reaching the conclusion of this mystery or finding this ancient item or whatever it might be would be the satisfying conclusion for my character. And so that's like, it might be interesting to, and maybe other people do this already, but to, in that session 0, be like, all right, let's try to forecast a little bit. And it doesn't have to be specific, but even if you were just like, I would like my character to fill in the blank, become the king, or
redeem themselves, or
redeem themselves, or discover a new hyperspace route, or whatever it might be, to at least have a signpost and something that you can come back to throughout the campaign. And maybe that's a like mid-campaign check-in of like, all right, like, how's everybody doing with their goals? And now we're just talking about character motivation, right? And just making that explicit, and saying, okay, what motivates your character?
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because a lot of people's goals in an RPG session will change once they start playing, which is why I've never been a fan of, I know this is a divisive issue, but like, I've never been a fan of character backstories for RPGs, and the lengths that some people go to for their character backstories is frankly absurd. I understand why people do it, because it's fun to write your character backstories, and I totally get it. People feel like they've got ownership of their characters and want to put as much work as they possibly can into it. And I know people who have filled whole notebooks with backstory for their characters, which I can guarantee one page of which will ever appear. And I always say this to people when they ask why I don't like that approach, and I say, well, think of any character that you like in popular media, and I bet you there is nowhere near the amount of character backstory has gone into planning that character. And in pretty much in anything that demands a performance, so a performance in a film or a TV show, a lot of that performance will be found whilst they're doing it, right? That's how you find it. How many times I've started a campaign with a certain idea of a character, and then session one, that goes out the window because I've put on a funny voice and done something else which doesn't fit. Or, you do something that doesn't fit, or it doesn't feel quite right. My Star Trek Adventures campaign is a case in point. That character was supposed to be a dark, brooding bad boy of Starfleet. It was just much better if he was a himbo party boy who somehow managed to scrape out of every situation he was in by the skin of his teeth, but cares deeply about his crew's well-being and will put his body on the line and put himself in danger, even if he doesn't understand how bad the danger is, because that's just naturally where the quote-unquote performance of that character went. And the thing is, like, no game master will ever be able to work in your backstory that's more than like 5 pages long. So I think you're right. Like, in a session 0, talking about like what drives your character, what do you think your character is wanting to do, and then that's enough for a GM to like start to lay those crumbs. And like I say, I've got absolutely no issue if someone comes to one of my tables and says, "Oh, I've written 10 pages of backstory." I say that's fine. I don't want to read it, but like that's up to you. Like, if you give me that backstory, I'm not going to be able to do anything with this because no one can do anything with this much backstory. It's frankly unnecessary. So I like that kind of check-in thing with seeing if your characters are going in a direction you want and if they're moving any closer towards your goals. And that's why, like in solo games, as Ironsworn especially, hey, with the Ironsworn Guyz, let's say it, you have a background vow that you are always chipping away at, and you've got other vows that you kind of come on top of that, but like you've got that one in the background just constantly ticking away. Now, at the end of my campaign, I realized that my background vow and some other vows I had running were the same vow, and if I had my time again, it would be done slightly differently. And I think that I realize now that when I wasn't working towards a vow that was in front of me, I could have spent time just looking at my background vow, but I didn't. I just assumed that whatever I was doing would be ticking off the boxes on that background vow. And you live and learn. Probably not the best example of play you'll ever see, but then that's not why I'm making made my show. But I like that idea of having something that you're always working towards, and having that be part of, and if the other players know as well, because I think it's in, when I first started playing role-playing games, all of my characters had to have a dark secret, right? I was like, it's gonna come out because that's dramatically interesting. But is that dramatically interesting? Is it more interesting if everyone knows what I want as a character and we all help each other try and realize it? I think that's more fulfilling than me going, the whole time I was his son. And they'll be like, who? Oh, you're the guy we met. The king we did the thing for. I'm a prince. Yeah. And they're like, okay, oh, that's a cool story, bro.
That's nice. Yeah. And moving on. Yeah. No, I've long been a proponent of, rather than having a character hold a secret close, be like, all right, as players, we've got the player level and then we've got the character level. And like, none of your characters know this, but if all the players know the secret, then when something comes up in the role play, I as a player can try to like reach out and signpost and be like, say something ironic that interacts with that other player's secret, or ask them leading questions to give them the space to open up and talk about that stuff and to like bring it to light. Because I think you're absolutely right. Like, what's the point of coming up with a dark secret that never gets shared at the table because it's a secret and nobody knows to ask about it because they're all worried about their own characters
Hmm.
and their own dark secrets and whatever things they're trying to achieve. And so putting all of that out on the table gives us the opportunity as a group to weave those things into the story, which I think does have the potential to lead to a more satisfying conclusion
Hmm.
to a story.
Yeah. And to go on about it again, The Between has a great thing where you don't know any of the characters' backstories until they're revealed at certain points in the game. Like you'll do something and then you'll tick a box and then you're like, tell us about this aspect from your past. And you reveal everything during play. You are forbidden from talking about your past in any unless the mechanics of the game tell you specifically to do it. You are forbidden on mentioning your character's past. And there's many times in my campaign I've had to tap the sign and just say, hang on, before you say this, like it is forbidden for you to say this until it's, and then it does it at dramatic moments. And you're encouraged to share those flashbacks when they're most dramatically appropriate.
That's cool.
It's very cool. Unfortunately, I can't make every game The Between, which is what I'd like to do, because I think that game is pretty amazing. But yeah, I think it's, and when you have a solo game, there's you kind of have to put everything on the table, especially if you're making it for an audience. Like if Archer would have had some dark secret, I mean, how kind of like anticlimactic would that have been?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I like that freedom of being knowing exactly where you want to go in a story. And I did not expect to get there via this route, but from quite early on, I would say probably towards the end of the first season when I realized that Luna would be sticking around, because I mean, I've said this many times before, Luna is a lot of people's favorite character in my show, and she was just rolled up randomly to deliver some exposition at a new place that Archer had found himself, and co-lead of the show, ended up playing her for most of this third season, and yeah, a character that everyone likes. When I realized that she was sticking around, I was like, oh, okay, now there are some really interesting stakes because there's a relationship here that I care about. And,
Yeah.
It's now not just a case of Archer trying to fulfill his goal of finding the professor or whatever he was trying to do. There's now something else going on. And then I think once season 2 started and the two characters separated, I found myself thinking about what an ending might be. And it changed a little bit, but invariably it was kind of the ending that I had for Archer and Luna, and it didn't actually change that much from that point, which is kind of interesting. Like I didn't know any of the details, and some of the details that came out in those last two episodes were completely in the moment from dice rolls, oracles that kind of came up. But yeah, just a vague sense of where it was going was nice. And there was a bit where in the very last episode I narrated a little bit and I was like, why is that familiar to me? And then I was like, oh, actually I've described this bit in one of Archer's dreams in a previous like 2 years ago. And I was like, that's just completely accidental, but it kind of, I'm saying it now. I didn't then.
Yeah.
I'll just pretend I meant it, and and that'll be that.
I think that's really interesting that you had that kernel of an idea of where you wanted to end, and that mostly kind of rung true, even though some of the details changed and stuff like that. I've found in my own games, and this is I think a carryover from my writing style, is that I usually start a story with my beginning and my end point that I think I'm going towards. And I think I have almost never gotten to that end point.
Yeah.
Because I'm discovering the story on the way, and I always find other things come up, and I usually find that the ending that I reach is a more interesting and more satisfying ending than the ending that I originally thought of. And so, uh, I like, because I've done multiple seasons, in my first season, I didn't, and that was a case where I didn't actually have an ending in mind. I was just kind of like, well, I'm going to see where this goes. And when I finally probably got halfway through, I was like, all right, I'm starting to see where the ending is for this story. And then ultimately where I ended up, I was like, oh, this is not what I thought was going to happen at all. But now I really like it because it has changed my perception of my universe, of the universe that that story was set in. And with the second season, I had an idea of kind of where I wanted to end. But again, I was open to, based on the dice rolls, the enemies that my characters were pursuing could have escaped, and the show could have gone on longer as they continued to pursue them. But it was again, it was that, like, I had a specific ending in mind, but the details of it were completely different than what I expected them to be. And then, you know, now I'm kind of doing this more, I'm more focused on a longer running campaign set in a singular setting. And I have a very specific ending in mind for the first season, the first book, if you will, of this adventure. And I'm kind of curious to see if this might be the first time that I actually, like, stick to that ending, because it has a lot of, like, dramatic weight, and it's something I've been thinking about for years. Because actually this campaign that I'm running solo is a sort of parallel continuation of a campaign that I started running for my friends back in 2018, 2019, that ended prematurely because of the pandemic. And we couldn't continue for a variety of reasons. And so I've been noodling on this idea for this campaign. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to do for this next adventure for Errant Adventures, I was like, I'm going to go back to that campaign and, actually kind of do the things that I had planned to do for that setting. And so I think it's really interesting to approach solo games specifically with this idea of, I have an ending in mind, but because I'm also, we're not just writers writing a story from beginning to end, we're also playing a game where the dice rolls can have an influence on the story. It's important to be open to finding your ending rather than having a predetermined ending.
Yeah. And
What do you think about that?
No, I think that exactly backs up what I was saying. Like, I think when Luna appeared in the story and was clear that she was sticking around,
Yeah.
that's when I realized what the ending was and what the stakes were of the story and where it could go. But I also think, as we would kind of listen to you talk there, this is all an extension of one of those Powered by the Apocalypse principles of being a fan of your character, right? That's a thing that is hammered into every single game that's powered by the Apocalypse. Be a fan of your characters and be a fan of the player characters if you're the DM. And if you're a fan of a character, you want to see them have an arc. You want to see them start in one place and end in another. You want to see them go somewhere, and finding that should be the role of a GM in any role playing game, to give the characters around the table the most satisfying arc, and that includes a bit of cooperation with the players, and a little back and forth and ebb and flow. And I think that talking to them and finding out what they want from the story and what they want from their arc is really important. And I think that just listening to you there, just thinking about how it ties into the idea about backstory for me, and what I dislike about people who have these intense backstories, because they've already seen where their story finishes. Like, I don't think it matters if you figure out where your story is going to go 10 sessions in and you want to work towards that. But if you're very clear from the beginning exactly how you want this character's story to end, then you're kind of limiting yourself, I think, in many ways. I'm not saying that you can't do that, because you probably can. It's just you don't leave yourself open to things that develop as naturally and organically during play, which is, I think, where we both are with our solo games. There's been a lot that we thought would go in a certain direction, and then it's organically picked up things. And like when I've started playing my campaign, I had a vague sense that there would be a story in season 1, but I did not anticipate that season 2 would see Archer falling through an iron gate in the sky with no spaceship onto a planet full of electric dinosaurs, because that's where it went. And saying that out of context seems weird, I understand, but in context of the show, that seemed like a reasonable thing to happen. I
like that idea of people, and I say this as somebody who has written extensive backstories for characters and still enjoy doing that.
Yeah, it's fun.
But it's the sort of thing where I do that for me, and I never expect anyone else to read it. But I think there's an art to writing a backstory, and I think this is what you're talking about, of like, you want to write a backstory where you have questions, not answers. And that then, because if you have all the answers in your backstory, and like you were saying, you have an idea of like, well, this is the place where I want to end this character, then you're even subconsciously going to say no to things that could be interesting in the course of play, because you're like, no, that doesn't fit with my conception of where my character is going to end. And it is possible that you might be turning off avenues that would lead to a far more interesting and a far more satisfying conclusion to your character, by that very nature of saying like, no, that doesn't fit with my final conclusion on this. And so I think it's really important when creating characters to, like I said, have more questions than answers, and leave things open-ended in a way that if you want to bring it into the story, and if you have a game master who is interested in bringing that kind of stuff in, go for it. Otherwise, like, there is so much story being created, and really good shared story being created at the table, that becomes your character's backstory. Because at the end of a campaign, you're probably not going to look back on your character and say, oh, I'm really glad that I grew up in that elf enclave that was destroyed by dragons, and that led to me being a ranger who hunts dragons or whatever. You're going to look back and be like, man, we had so much fun when I tied an arrow to Bing Bong the Goblin, and then we miniaturized him and fired him off, across the chasm. Like, that's the stuff that is the true kind of backstory of your characters, is all the stuff that happens in play that builds and creates your characters. So I think it's really important to approach and give yourself the freedom to develop your character, just like you're having, hopefully, the freedom to develop the story as you're playing through. And then when you get to the end of the campaign, you have a developed character that you have developed at the table with friends, and hopefully you had a good time with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned earlier that it was a Power by the Apocalypse principle of being a fan of your characters. We've talked about it before, the idea of drawing maps but leaving blanks. It's the same thing about backstory. Like, by all means, come up with a cool backstory, but like leave some space to explore. But yeah, I think that's it. I think we've moved slightly off topic of ending things, but I thought it was all good.
How are we going to end this episode, Matt?
I'll just cut to black.